Hi, this is Rob Akins. I'm here with my brother Fred Akins, and we're going to talk about Jim Farley. A month or two ago, decided that he was going to try out the Ford F-150 Lightning on a real life cross country trip with his son. So there was an article that was in the Drive, which is an online publication, and they kind of took through or went through some of the challenges and so forth of how that trip went. So let's pull this up and go through the article.
Yeah, the interesting thing was that Farley didn't drive the Lightning just on the interstate. Instead, he drove at least part of the way on historic Route 66, which kind of sort of parallels Interstate 40 once you get to Oklahoma and points west. So it was a real test because it would almost be too easy to just recharge right off of the interstate.
Right, and you know, that's kind of one of the things that I want to talk about, because Americans, and we are a different breed when it comes to our cars and our trucks and our driving habits than some of our peers in Europe and Asia and so forth. Maybe that's because of the size of the United States, or just our heritage for wanting to explore and roam. But there are a lot of people that love the idea of just being able to jump in their vehicle and drive. I think this is a cool article because it kind of gets to the heart of where we maybe want to be eventually, but where we are now, and trying to mesh the maybe the tradition of freedom to roam with one of the realities right now of purely electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, is a limited range before you have to stop and recharge. So basically, you know, Jim got in his vehicle and had a chase vehicle and so forth, and they set out. And we'll just look at a little Twitter post that he put. No surprise, charging can be a challenge, but still learning a lot and seeing firsthand the issues our customer face. And I give him credit for doing this, because way too often I think the CEOs of these companies, they, for lack of a better term, they're kind of detached from the day-to-day reality of some of these, you know, of what their vehicles, what the user experience can be of their vehicles. And especially some of the people who love the thought of doing away with the internal combustion engine and fossil fuels, and always in this wonderful that you can get in a vehicle and drive across town and park, do your thing, get in your vehicle again, drive back across town to your home. Maybe the round trip is 20 miles, and we didn't burn up any dead dinosaurs or, you know, what have you. But that's not how a lot of people live, especially in this case with a truck. You know, we've had this conversation a lot where I live in Wisconsin, and in rural Wisconsin, number one, it gets cold in the winter, which will challenge a battery electric vehicle in the first place. But we have people who live 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away from the nearest gas station, and they've got to be able to drive their vehicle tow with it. And they don't have time to worry about range anxiety. So anyway, Farley got in the F-150 Lightning, and they've recently announced an agreement with Tesla to tap into their charging network, which I think is great. So 12,000 plus superchargers and more being added. And so one of the things that he found as he went through this trip is there is a big difference in chargers from one stop to the next. And maybe you can talk about that a little bit, about what the reality is of the different charging networks.
Right. Let's start there with sort of a primer on EV charging. There's basically right now 3 different levels of charger. There's level 1, which is your household 120 volt outlet, which for an EV is like filling your gas tank using an eyedropper. It's monumentally slow. If you have time to plug your EV in for 24 to 48 hours, that might work for you. Most people, and virtually every home charger, is what's called a level 2 or 240 volt charging system. And that's what most people will use to charge up an EV, including the F-150 Lightning. But for going long distances and charging an EV quickly, there's what's called a DC fast charger. Now, every one of these DC fast chargers costs roughly $50,000 to install, which is why you see them at charging stations or at Tesla supercharger out network, sort of out in the middle of the country, out in the middle of the countryside. Think of it as kind of a mega gas station for EVs. You want to pull in, you want to plug in, you're there for as little as 20 minutes in the case of if the vehicle architecture is optimized for DC fast charging, like a Porsche Taycan or the best Teslas and the Hyundai Kia EVs, those use what's called 800 volt architecture, which means you can charge the battery really, really fast, and the system can handle it, and it doesn't throttle it. So you can suck down a lot of electrons in a hurry and get back on the road.
Yeah, and so say you pull into one of the fast chargers and you plug your vehicle in this case, the F-150 Lightning. Now, we've grown up, you pull off the interstate, pull into a gas station, 5 or 10 minutes, you gas up, you go inside, take care of some business, that kind of thing, you're boom, back on the road. How long typically do you think it would take most people to get a charge that would, maybe get them another couple 100 miles down the road?
Well, most EV fast chargers, they're not all created equal. So some will operate at 350 kilowatts, which is the current fastest speed, but others are 150 or even 75 kilowatts. So again, your charging time may vary based on the DC fast charger that you've plugged into and whether your vehicle can accept the full fast charge at 350 kilowatt hours or kilowatts, or if it throttles down to 150 or less. And so right now, that's an area of consumer confusion. because most consumers don't understand that. So they think, okay, I'm pulling into a DC fast charger. I should be back on the road in, let's say, 40, 45 minutes. And typically with an EV, you shouldn't, most manufacturers don't recommend that you go below 20% charge, or on the upper end, that you don't charge past 80%, because the fast charger really slows down between 80 and 100.
Okay,
so
the sweet
again,
spot is up to 80.
Right. The sweet spot is between 20 and 80%. And it also depends on a few other factors. You're back in Wisconsin, where in the winter, it gets really freaking cold. Well, that's a problem for EVs, and that's a problem for the charging system. So a DC fast charger might not operate at optimum speed on a 0-degree Wisconsin winter day. Now, out here in California, sometimes it gets really, really hot. Same thing happens on the other end. It might not charge properly on the upper end, and extreme heat also impairs the operation of the EV itself. So for instance, EVs lose, I think it's about 30% range at 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's pretty.
It's, the numbers are still evolving, because they're tested. They're now actually, there's enough EVs out in the real world that they're beginning to get real world data and feedback. And I think you're going to find that, some of the claims that have been made for EV charging speeds and everything may not survive the real world. They might have to be adjusted.
So from a consumer expectation standpoint, does a driver have any way of, when they're mapping out their route and they can see the different charging stations? Of course, they can pull it up, I'm sure, on the nav system in these vehicles. Do they have any way of knowing how fast the chargers are when they're looking at the screen or at the map?
They're supposed to, and they're supposed to be able to plug in. Now, when I was testing EVs, when I was at Kia, we did a quote unquote cross country trip. We basically went from Orange County down to San Diego and back. Now, it's about 90 miles as the crow flies, but we went inland a little bit over the Ortega Highway. We went down to San Diego. We drove around a bit and came back to, and we stayed overnight in San Diego. And there were some interesting learnings on that. First of all, and this is, again, back in the sort of early days, this is pre-2015, early days of EVs, there were a couple of places that the map said, oh, there's a charging system here. There's a charging station here. Well, there technically was. One of the charging stations was on the roof of a parking structure in the city of Temecula. So we had to all file in through the gate and go to the top floor of this charging station. And I think there were 2 chargers that we could plug 6 vehicles into. Let's just say we had a long lunch.
Yes.
Then we got down to San Diego, and there was supposed to be an available charger at a shopping mall. Well, we got to said shopping mall and discovered that the chargers were all behind a locked gate in the parking lot. So, of course, somebody had to go to the mall office and get somebody who had a key to the locked gate so that we could use the level 2 chargers that were technically there at the mall, but inaccessible to our vehicles. So
yeah, and we don't
and yes, the apps have gotten better. The apps are better, but I'm still seeing enough horror stories from, again, the real world, people using EVs out in the hinterlands, what everybody calls flyover country, where, oh, I got to this EV charger, and yes, it was a DC fast charger, but it was operating at the slowest possible speed. And so I had to sit there for twice as long to get any kind of usable range out of it. Or I got to this bank of fast chargers, and 3 out of the 4 of them were broken or inoperative.
Yeah, and I think that again goes back to where the real world meets the theoretical world. And we have a lot of people out there that have maybe good intentions, maybe some of them are a little bit over the top, but they say, oh no, this is the wave of the future, everybody's going to drive an EV, and everybody's going to be happy because they can charge them overnight in off-peak hours, and then they can do their business. And most driving is done, admittedly, within, say, a 40 or 50 mile an hour or mile range of people's homes. So for a day-to-day living with an EV, yeah, that probably could make sense. But some of these laws that are being put into place, where, for example, your great state of California, where the theoretical cutoff for not being able to buy an internal combustion vehicle anymore is what, 2030 or 2030?
2035.
Okay.
And the interesting thing, the more I've looked into that law, the more I've discovered is there's a loophole big enough to drive a full-size car through. They're encouraging EVs, but the law allows for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So if you've got a vehicle that you can plug in, let's say it's a Prius Prime, Toyota Prius Prime, but it still has a gas engine and a gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
So those are allowed under this law. But California, of course, doesn't really publicize that part of it.
Okay, so they've given themselves a bit of an out.
They've given themselves, I think it's actually a decent out, because personally, I happen to think that the plug-in hybrid EV is the bridge solution to the all EV future. The problem is the EV zealots don't want to recognize that.
Well,
it's a case of the perfect being the enemy of the good. And
right,
a plug-in hybrid EV is very, very good, but it's not perfect.
Right, it's not pure. I do want to stop and point out that we have nothing against EVs. I know you've driven a lot more than I have, but there are some great vehicles out there that are full electric that can be wonderful solutions for transportation for a lot of people. But we have to look at reality. And when we go back to the Farley trip, and he talks about how charging has been a challenge, and then he talks about they got to near Harris Ranch in Coalinga, which is almost all the way to Monterey from Detroit, and they pulled in, and the truck spent 40 minutes in the station to receive a 40% charge. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm getting close to where I want to be, and I've been driving 1,000, 1,500 miles, I don't want to sit there for 40 minutes to get 40% charge, because a 40% charge is not going to I don't think it's going to get me from Coalinga to Monterey. At least it's going to make me a little nervous.
Yes, that would be the definition of range anxiety, because I know that exact drive from Harris Ranch over to Monterey, and it's twisty, and you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
And in August it's damn hot, so you're running the AC full bore.
Exactly, and it's not like you can pull off to a little house out there in the middle of nowhere and borrow a cup of electricity to get you on your way.
No, and you can't call AAA for a gallon of electrons.
No. So
no, I've developed EVs, I've tested EVs, I've driven many of the current EV competitors, and it's a lot better than it used to be. But contrary to what various government entities and environmentalists think, we're not there yet. And my great fear, as somebody who likes EVs and wants to see them succeed, is that if you push a solution prematurely and you force it on the public, then you will get backlash. And the public will say, essentially, you lied to us. We aren't going to trust you again.
Right.
And they say it to the manufacturers, but they also say it to the government entities, because the manufacturers are all too happy to say, hey, we wanted to keep selling you gasoline vehicles. They made us switch to full EVs.
Sure.
And even General Motors and their CEO, Mary Barra, has gone on record as saying, we aspire to offer 100% EVs by 2035, in line with California and the administration's goals. Right. Now, I point out that her statement said, we aspire to do that. That is our goal. Unfortunately, many in the mainstream media shortened that to our goal. We will do this by 2035. And as much as GM's PR people said, no, Mary said, we aspire to this goal, it got reported as, and the headline writers said, GM will go 100% EV by 2035. And I can imagine the heartburn that the PR staff had in dealing with that, because they're going, no, that's not right. That's not accurate. But at that point, it's out there and you're doing damage control.
Well, and that goes back to where we've got a lot of people out there that maybe are politicians or regulators or just very zealous about the EV future. And they, don't tell me about the labor, just show me the baby. They don't want to really have to work their way through all the real issues that are going to pop up as we move to more of an electric future. They just assume that, well, it's just going to happen because it needs to happen. And that I just don't see how that's realistic, because we still have a certain amount of free will.
Well, exactly.
Consumers still can buy what they want to buy, and maybe part of these laws, the theory behind them is, well, if we take away their choice and they can't buy an internal combustion vehicle anymore, that will force them to adopt it, and then they'll realize how wonderful it is. But if we don't make them buy an EV or adopt the EV, then we can't just wait around and wait for them to decide it's the right thing to do. We need to use the coercive power of government to make
Well,
sure that these things we believe are important happen on our timetable.
right, exactly. And that's why a lot of these EV rules are referred to as EV mandates. And you and I have talked about this many times. Basically, a governmental mandate is the equivalent of a parental do it because I said so. Because I said so. Don't ask questions. I don't have time to explain why this is a good thing. You just have to take my word for it. This is a good thing. And maybe that works with a 6-year-old or a 4-year-old. It tends not to work with sentient adults who look at the sacrifices required to go full EV and they go, wait a minute, you mean I can't just get in and go across the middle of the country in the dead of night and get to my destination and only stop every 400 miles to fill up the tank for 5 minutes or 10 minutes if I have to use the restroom and keep going? Because American society has evolved as a highly mobile society. And as you pointed out at the top of this, we're not like Europe or Asia, where they don't have the tradition of the private vehicle driving long distances across the continent or whatever. They're used to getting on a train, getting on a bus, maybe getting on an airplane if they're well-to-do, and flying to their destination. And so, as we've talked before, we Americans don't do sacrifice very well.
Yes.
And if you ask Americans to give up a freedom that virtually every one of them has had since they were age 16 or even before, and say, no, you can't do that anymore, you're going to have to give them a damn good reason why not, or they are going to, at the very least, resent the taking away of the freedom, and at worst, they will rebel against the removal of that freedom of mobility.
Right. And I want to make sure that we don't get too off track, but one of the things that occurs to me is most families have more than one vehicle. They've got a vehicle for commuting or running around doing their errands. And then a lot of families have vehicles where they can pile the kids, the dog, friends, whatnot into, whether it's a road trip for a vacation or they're going to some kind of travel sports tournament or what have you. And that vehicle tends to be the big vehicle, and it tends to be the internal combustion vehicle, because
yes,
they just want to get in, they want to go, they don't want to think about recharging along the way. Someplace it might take them anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half, depending on what charging station they get. And the other thing is, if you're traveling on a weekend or a holiday weekend, you could pull into one of these fast charging stations and there are no chargers available. And
well, there was a famous photo from a few years ago, pre-pandemic, of a Tesla supercharger station that happened to be at the Madonna Inn in San Luis Obispo, someplace you and I are quite familiar with. And it was a line, it was a conga line of Teslas waiting to recharge. And I think it was like the 4th of July weekend or something, or Memorial Day, but it was a holiday weekend, and all of these people were stuck. And they were, other than the one or two, and there's probably more there now, but other than the few vehicles that were able to plug in quickly and recharge, it was a mess. And it became an internet meme with all of these Teslas lined up and people standing next to their Teslas waiting to use the charger. Kind of like the lines outside a women's restroom at a sporting event.
Right.
And everybody's looking at their watch or their phone going, when am I going to be able to charge? And that's the potential. But let's turn back to Farley's trip.
Yes.
The F-150 that he was using, F-150 Lightning, wonderful vehicle. I've driven it. I love driving it, but it doesn't necessarily work as a real truck. And I know that was his purpose of showing that you could use an EV as a real truck to do real truck things like go cross country, except he wasn't hauling a bed full of firewood. He wasn't hauling a fishing boat behind it. It was just he and his son and their luggage. And so, that's pretty light duty for a pickup truck.
That's not why most people buy a pickup truck.
Right. The other thing is, if he was to try and do that trip, if he left the LA area, let's say here in Orange County, to go to Las Vegas, that's about a 250, 275 mile drive. Now you can do it using the stated range on the F-150 Lightning, but you would be sweating the last 50 miles of that trip because, again, the optimal F-150 Lightning range with the big battery is 320 miles. Well, let's say you're at 270, but you're going to Las Vegas across the Mojave Desert. So you're going to have the air conditioning cranked. There's some very long uphill grades going from sea level up to Las Vegas, which is, I think, 2,000 feet elevation or so. Okay, well, going up 2,000 feet, gravity is not your friend. So all of a sudden, you're going to watch your range on that F-150 Lightning drop from 320 to, once you get over the Tejon Pass outside of San Bernardino, all of a sudden your range is starting to drop and you still have 200 miles to go across the desert. Now, let's say it's over 100 and you're using the AC. Well, now the range is coming down in chunks.
Right. And one of the things that you've pointed out in the past is EVs are much more efficient at slow speeds, city driving, because they're not having to displace a bunch of air. They're not going up and down, grades, mountains.
Right. And an F-150 has the aerodynamic profile of a garden shed.
Right.
So you're shoving a lot of air out of the way rudely.
Right. Yeah. And so when you're driving through the desert, and you're looking at that range meter dropping, it's adding stress to your life that if you were driving a traditional or even a hybrid F-150, it's not even a consideration.
No, at that point you are not sweating because you've got the AC cranked and it's not costing you range. You bring up the F-150 hybrid. My wife and I just just ordered one. We're waiting for it to arrive. It's built now. And and people ask me, well, why did you get that instead of an F-150 Lightning? I said, well, here's the thing. We do a lot of cross-country trips, a couple thousand miles at a time, going from Southern California to Wisconsin or Indiana and back. And a typical day for us is somewhere between 600 and 900 miles of driving. If we had an F-150 Lightning, that means that we would, even if conditions are optimal, that means we start out with 320 miles and we go approximately 300 miles because you want to have a little bit of reserve. We go approximately 300 miles. Now, to get back up to 300 miles of range, we'd have to stop and recharge for, let's say, a couple of hours. Well, that's a long lunch stop. But then we get back in, we drive some more. So the best we can hope for is probably in a day's worth of driving, 10 to 12 hours, the best we can hope for is maybe 400 to 500 miles of range. Okay. Well, that means our 2,000-mile trip, instead of taking 3 days, now takes 4 days. So that's an extra hotel. That's an extra night's hotel stay, et cetera, et cetera. I said, that's why we opted for the hybrid. Now, it would be better if Ford offered a plug-in hybrid where all of our around town driving could be done strictly on electricity using the onboard battery. And the only time we use the gas engine is when we're out in the middle of nowhere, where by the way, the air is cleaner anyway.
And you're not idling in traffic and all those things.
Exactly. And that's where a gas engine is most inefficient, and that's where an EV is conversely most efficient. That's why I happen to believe that a plug-in hybrid EV, even though it's not the perfect solution, it's damn near perfect, and it doesn't have the drawbacks that a pure EV does.
Right. So just wrapping up on the Farley story, I think basically what he came to understand is that this is still a work in progress. There are a lot of things that still need to be worked out. Improving, obviously, partnering with Tesla is going to hopefully help with the availability of charging, the speed of charging. It sounds like other manufacturers are moving in that direction to tap into Tesla's infrastructure. But, at the end of the day, just like this article says, his eye-opening interpretation of the state of EV infrastructure reflects how Americans charge today before NACS becomes even more. That's the charging
Tesla system.
Yes, the Tesla system. While much of the growth of Tesla's network will surely improve that, we're still trying to get there, and there's a lot of money being spent by the government to build out the charging infrastructure, which makes sense. But this is a giant basket of, we'll see.
Yes,
we just don't know when it's going to be ready for prime time.
Well, it's good that you mentioned the government spending on EV infrastructure, because the horribly named Inflation Reduction Act included $5 billion for building out, I think, 50,000 or so, or maybe it was 500,000 high speed, chargers, which sounds like a lot of money, and it sounds like a big number. The problem is our needs for the EV charging infrastructure have been estimated at somewhere between 7.5 and 15 billion. So in other words, it made a down payment on the EV charging infrastructure, but it doesn't go far enough, fast enough. Oh, the other thing is the IRA also, because of when it was written, it mandated that Tesla chargers had to switch or had to be available with the old, outdated CCS charger that everybody used before they agreed to switch over to the NACS or Tesla charging port. So the law as written mandates an outdated charger that it's going to have to be amended at some point so that it can be properly implemented with the latest and greatest charging system, which the industry now agrees is the Tesla charging system, or NACS.
So yeah, a lot still to be worked out, obviously. I think the point of this exercise, this conversation, is just that we still have a long way to go, no matter how much we wish we could just have a turnkey solution that gets us off of having to use so much in the way of fossil fuels and so forth. Consumers vote with their wallet and they vote with their feet. And no matter how much you tell them that this is the way to go, this is the right thing to do, you will do this. At a certain point, we're human beings. We adapt. We will change our behavior. We will push back in our own way. And we haven't gotten into all sorts of issues like, what if you live in an apartment and you don't have your own garage to charge overnight?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of people for whom an EV simply does not work and will not work.
Right.
And all of the government mandates to force that solution down somebody's throat. The other thing is, we haven't touched on, EVs are expensive. EVs are approximately, let's see, the average new car price is just under 50,000. The average EV price is over 60,000. So let's say there's a 20% premium for an EV. Okay, well, you've just priced with a 20% increase. You've priced a lot of people, especially young people, economically disadvantaged people. You've priced a lot of people out of the market. There's also not a ton of used EVs out there because we're still in the steep part of the adoption curve.
Correct.
That's going to be a problem for people unless the government's going to start handing out affordable EVs. Oh, and by the way, Chevy just canceled the Bolt.
Yeah,
which was their affordable EV.
Right. And you mentioned how EVs are more expensive on average than their internal combustion counterparts. And some people say, well, that's okay, you're going to be saving all that money on gas. Well, there's an article, and we don't have time to go into it too deeply now, but there's an article from the Business Insider that says, not so fast. The cost to charge your vehicle versus gassing up is actually pretty equivalent. And in some cases, if you're not charging at home, you're using one of these high-speed chargers where you actually have to pay at the charger to tap into it, you actually could be paying more per 100 miles of range to recharge your EV than you would putting gasoline or diesel into your internal combustion vehicle. So in these days when a lot of consumers are stretched pretty tightly as far as what they can afford because of all the inflation that we've seen in the last few years, this windfall that some of the EV proponents talk about, where, oh gee, you don't have to stop at the gas station and put these hydrocarbons into your vehicle anymore. You can save so much money by not having to pay outrageous gasoline prices. Maybe not.
Well, for here in California, gas is over $5. In fact, over the weekend, I saw something where the average price in the state of California for regular was over $6 a gallon. My son, who works in a gas station back there in Wisconsin, I asked him what the price of gas was, and it was just over $3 a gallon for regular in Appleton. Well, that's a mighty big price differential,
right?
And that's a price differential large enough for us to drive our big old F-150 through.
Right, and
so
that doesn't even touch on what we've already talked about with the amount of time it takes to recharge a vehicle, the range anxiety.
Exactly. So again, if somebody tells you that EVs are the way to go and that the argument is settled, or the phrase I love, the science is settled, it's not.
Right.
It's not.
And
yeah. The key phrase to remember is it depends, because here in California, electricity prices in the last several years have jumped by 54%.
Yep.
And that's despite the state spending all kinds of money that they're taking from the taxpayers, spending all kinds of money to shift the electrical grid and production to green renewable sources.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up, looking at trucks, since we've been talking about F-150 Lightning and so forth,
right?
Whether you're fueling a Ford F-Series, a Ram 1500, Chevy Silverado, it costs about $17.58 for every 100 miles. Trucks that take diesel cost about $17.10. Now, it varies by state. Obviously, some states diesel is more expensive than gasoline. But if you have a Rivian R1T or a GMC Hummer, the cost to charge at home isn't that much different. Okay, about $17.70 per 100 miles. Well, they're pretty cost parity. However, if you want to use a high-speed public charger, then all of a sudden, instead of that $17.70 per 100 miles, we might be looking at $26.88. And so that, where'd my savings go? Now I'm not laughing as I drive past the gas station. I'm crying. And so I think it's just a matter of we've got to make sure that we're looking at the big picture here, and we're looking at all sides of the story. It's not an easy.
It's not a finger snap, and you have to look at it holistically.
Right. It's not all sunshine and butterflies.
And the problem is that, if you make this wholesale change to EVs, without a commensurate improvement in power generation and the electrical grid, then, as we discussed earlier, if you raise the demand for a commodity without commensurately increasing the supply of said commodity, guess what happens to the price? It goes up. I mean, that's basic economics. Unfortunately, most politicians and bureaucrats never took basic economics in school. They took a lot of political science,
or
but they didn't take economics.
They've taken a lot of theoretical classes, and one of my favorite sayings is there's a big group of people that look at the world through the through the lenses of academics, and the question they always ask is, well, I know it works in practice, but will it work in theory?
Or as Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the nose.
Right. Right. And then exactly. All the old cliches about, in war, a strategy is only as good, only works until the first shot is fired. And then you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants, and you have to deal with the lot that you're presented with and so forth. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. Always enjoy our conversations, Fred. So we'll wrap this up there, but
maybe we can do our next one in person.
Yeah, that would be great. I know you're coming to the great state of Wisconsin, so we can actually sit down and both be at the same table. That would be kind of cool.
That will be. Look forward to it.
All right. Well, you have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.